Good day, everybody, and welcome to another Iceberg compilation that discusses inhuman encounters and other related phenomena. Today we're going to be talking about fairies, fairy folklore, fairy theories, fairy sightings, and because fairies are said to exist within the forest and kidnap children, we're also going to be discussing some of the most infamous haunted forests in the world and some of the most infamous disappearances of children that have yet to be explained. In their original context in mythology, fairies are a lot darker than Tinkerbell, so be prepared for some disturbing mythology about fairies and elves, chiefly focusing on European mythology because that's where a lot of the stories come from, but we do touch on some other possible appearances of fairies in history. This video is very close to my heart as my own elvish DNA will one day be revealed, but that's a topic for another day. Let's begin. Elves are without a doubt the most famous fairy species. It's also up in the air whether or not they're tiny, the size of human beings, or taller and exceedingly beautiful, as they are in their most famous portrayal in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. But in the original Germanic context, elves are described as being so small, they're nearly invisible, and were actually a negative influence. Anglo-Saxons of the era believed that elves were responsible for spreading disease, perhaps a very early form of understanding of germs. Later on, they would become associated with the Norse gods and shift to a more human-sized form, which is also where they got their reputation for being stunningly beautiful. These days, I'd argue that there are two forms of elves that people still believe in. The first and most popular are Christmas elves, workers for Santa Claus who are often hobbit-sized. The second is the mysterious clockwork elves, elves that visit users of psychedelic drugs from another dimension. Clockwork elves have been described as evil as well by some conspiracy theorists, with bug-like features and horns. This would bring elves full circle to their original interpretation, where they were small, buggish, parasitic beings who are often comparable to demons. Goblins can also very easily be conflated with these small, buggish elves from original Anglo-Saxon mythology. Goblins are the universal small guy in fantasy. Popularized in English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish mythology, goblins exist on a sliding scale from mischievous to downright malevolent. They're also heavily associated with the element of earth. In medieval European culture, the goblin has two alternate versions that capture this dichotomy. One is the hobgoblin, a friendly trickster variant. The hobgoblin today has been stretched into many other roles, from half-goblin, half-human hybrids to a relatively human-sized version of the goblin. But originally they were helpful versions of the otherwise morally ambiguous average goblin. The malevolent side of the scale is the red cap, a variant of the goblin that was inclined towards homicide. Red caps were so vicious that the red caps that they're described as wearing are perpetually soaked in the blood of their victims. They've remained unchanged for most of their cultural lifespan. Pixies, also oftentimes called sprites, are the closest mythological match to our current pop cultural interpretation of what a fairy is. They're small winged spirits, and although they can be pranksters, they're overwhelmingly seen as a positive influence. They love to dance and eat food made of wheat and originated in Celtic mythology. Many of the weaknesses that are often associated with fairy creatures can be most strongly linked to pixies, like their fear of iron and their compulsive need to count spilled salt or sugar kernels. Leprechauns are one of the most famous contributions of Irish mythology to the world of pop culture. After all, they're magically delicious. That didn't really land. They're also associated with shoemaking and are known to each have a personal pot of gold hidden at the end of a rainbow leading somewhere. I guess in Ireland? Gnomes are small benevolent creatures that originated under the pseudonym the Mineralogical Demon, owing to 1500s-era German miners. The Germans believed that the underground creatures were occasionally responsible for rewarding their labor with the discovery of silver ore deposits, and eventually gnomes became heavily associated with the art of alchemy, either as assistant spirits or physical practitioners, even surpassing human beings in their knowledge on the rare occasion. Another name for goblins and gnomes, kobold, is believed to have derived from the gnome's association with the element cobalt. Although kobolds have since been reimagined as subterranean reptilians, gnomes have relocated above ground, where its most popular modern interpretation, the garden gnome, remains a symbol of good luck for suburbanites across the planet. Pillywiggins are the first fairies from English folklore to have had butterfly and dragonfly wings. Based on how prominent that's become in the depiction of fairies these days, they're actually majorly influential for a relatively unknown creature. They can be beautiful and elvish or hideous and goblinesque, according to myth, but interestingly, their appearance can often be deceiving and the opposite of their true nature. The case of Catherine van Alst is the only one here that has a happy ending, but it does come with a twist. In 1946, the 8-year-old Catherine was camping with her family at the Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that something bad is going to happen to an 8-year-old sleeping overnight in a huge forest called Devil's Den. Sadly, something did, but not for long. Catherine disappeared while hiking along a creek and remained missing for 6 days. At the end of a long and harrowing search, Catherine was finally reunited with her father, in a dangerously dehydrated and malnourished state. Strangely, she was unable to remember most of the details of her time missing. All she could recall was falling asleep on warm grass, spending time in a cave, and eating blackberries, but she couldn't string together a full narrative of her time spent in the Devil's Den. It's interesting to note that the alleged alien abduction of Terry Lovelace also happened in the Devil's Den. Alien abductions are very similar in nature to fairy kidnappings of old world myth, and whether or not it's actually extraterrestrials responsible these days, or ultra-terrestrials, advanced beings like fairies native to Earth, is still a hot topic of debate among, scholars? Anyways, Terry's book Incident at Devil's Den details his experience, and a summary he himself wrote reads as follows. I'm a 64-year-old retired lawyer and former assistant attorney general with an extraordinary story to tell. Every word of it is true. For fear of losing my job and damage to my reputation in the legal community, I kept a secret. I was silent for 40 years until circumstances in 2011 compelled me to eventually speak out. In 1977, a friend and I went on a 2-night camping trip to a state park known as Devil's Den. We had planned the trip as a wilderness adventure. Instead of a wilderness adventure, we experienced an encounter with something unknown and unimaginable. Hoping to photograph eagles, we sought a remote area of high ground. With the road no more than a trail, we came to a high plateau. It was the perfect location, with the forest to our back and a large open meadow in front of us. We made camp and settled in for an evening around the campfire. Late in the same evening, I noticed the usual forest sounds of crickets and tree frogs had stopped. It was dead silent. The silence unnerved me, but my friend Toby assured me our laughter and chatter had quieted them and they'd soon return, but I still felt unsettled. Looking to the west, Toby asked, "Were those lights there before?" I turned to look. There on the horizon sat a perfect tight triangle of 3 very bright stars. We studied them for a few minutes and speculated what they might be. We first thought they were airplane lights, but dismissed the idea because of the odd formation. Then they began to move. They rotated once as if on an axis and began a slow ascent into the night sky. They moved in sync as if a single object instead of 3. After a few minutes, it became obvious that this was one object and not 3 separate lights. We watched it for some time. The lights on each point of the triangle grew brighter and expanded. The points stayed equidistant to one another as it gained altitude and speed. The area inside the triangle was solid black, much darker than the surrounding night sky. As it traveled over stars, they would blink out and blink back on again as it moved by. Soon, it grew large enough to devour entire fields of stars. We watched as the triangle made a steady trek towards our campsite, growing exponentially as it approached. At a height of about 2,000 feet above us, it came to a halt. It was enormous. It was as if someone cut a perfect triangle from a sky filled with a billion stars. As we watched this giant triangle over our heads, I recall that suddenly I felt disinterested. My friend was equally apathetic and hardly a word was spoken between us. The crickets and tree frogs had not returned, but I no longer felt unnerved. Picking up a flashlight, Toby said, "I wonder what will happen if I try to signal it?" I was too slow to snatch it from his hand. Holding it up, he flashed his light 3 times at the center of the triangle. We waited to see if anything would happen. We didn't have long to wait. From the center of the triangle, a beacon of light about the diameter of a softball came down as if someone had flipped a switch. The light was centered on our campfire, not much more than embers by now. It was intense, like a high-power searchlight cutting through the fog. We watched, disinterested, like casual observers. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it switched off. In its place came a laser-like beam of light no broader than a pencil. It darted quickly and danced about the campsite as if scanning us. The beam struck my chest and head. I recall it struck Toby as well as it darted around the campsite. Then it occurred to me that Toby had been wrong. The nighttime noises of the forest had not returned, but something would take its place. Sometimes a bad dream isn't just a bad dream. Sometimes it's your worst nightmare. Puck, or Robin Goodfellow, was an obscure character in Old English folklore. Depicted with satyr horns, he was analogous to the Greek god of the wilds, Pan, a hedonistic trickster with a morally dubious streak. Pan is often seen as a satyr, a horned humanid with cloven hooves, and many depictions of Robin Goodfellow borrow this imagery. He would later get the spotlight, no pun intended, in William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, as the central character and narrator. Puck's speech, "If we shadows have offended, think but this and all is mended," is probably Shakespeare's second most famous monologue, next to Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be. Orc is an interesting term linguistically. Its association with demons most likely comes from Orcus, the Roman god of death, although this origin isn't confirmed. The Roman author Pliny the Elder was the first to describe orcs as an independent species, being saber-toothed sea monsters who could also inhabit the mountainous region of the Alps. Orcs would later pop up in Celtic mythology, again as a fiendish race, and they would finally hit their stride culturally in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series, where they were described as former elves corrupted by the evil Lord Morgoth. A changeling is a shape-shifting being from the fairy realm. Fairies, in their original and more malevolent interpretation, were often described as having a tendency to kidnap children from our world and take them into theirs. In a stolen child's place, they would leave a changeling to assume their identity. It's unknown what becomes of humans who end up in the fairy realm. Texts like A Midsummer Night's Dream hint at dark fates like hypnotism and extreme body modification. The Black Forest is a forest in the mountainous region of Baden-Württemberg, Germany. Scattered throughout the place are several abandoned military forts which date back to as early as the 1600s. It's a popular staple in Germany's history and culture, and a great tourist attraction, but it's also rumored to be terribly cursed. Throughout the years, people have been claiming to see ghosts, fairies, and even werewolves there, and it has 2 unique legendary creatures of its own reportedly living within. One is a headless horseman, not the one from Sleepy Hollow, but a separate one that rides a white steed through the forest. It's interesting that Sleepy Hollow's headless horseman gets so much attention. One would probably think that's the only version of the legend. But it's not. Both Sleepy Hollow and the Black Forest's headless horseman owe to a much older Irish fairy creature called the Dullahan, a headless horseman that rides a ghostly steed, which also has a tendency to be on fire. The other creature said to dwell within the trees of Baden-Württemberg is the mysterious Forest King, who likes to kidnap human women and take them to his underwater lair, where he lives with a group of nymphs. In 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin was visiting the Great Smoky Mountains National Park with his family. One day, while accompanied by another family with similarly aged children, Dennis told his father his plan to surprise the children by hiding behind a bush and jumping out to scare them. His father watched as the young boy hid behind a nearby bush on the trail, and then he never saw him again. After minutes, he became concerned. Then, realizing that his son had disappeared, he ran miles up and down the trail before calling the National Park Rangers. A massive manhunt ensued, which turned up nothing except for a trail of small footprints that disappeared after they led to a creek. Authorities later stated that the prints didn't belong to Dennis, even though they did match the shoe print of his Oxford shoe. In 1985, a hunter claimed that a few years before the incident, he was hunting in the park and found the skeleton of a small child. He kept it a secret for over a decade because his hunting activity was apparently illegal, but despite a new search for the remains, nothing was found. The case has since been declared cold, with no explanation as to Dennis's tragic and bizarre vanishing. Dryads are a type of humanoid fairy spirit who take a form resembling beautiful human women. Dryads are forest spirits and can often be seen with tree bark-like skin in their true forms. They're part of a general class of female spirits from Greek mythology called nymphs that represent elements of the natural world like the woods and the ocean. The Green Knight is a central character in the story of King Arthur's nephew, Sir Gawain. Either a fellow knight transformed by the sorceress Morgana Le Fay, or a facet of the natural world, he appears in King Arthur's court and strikes up a rivalry with Gawain. He's considered a rival to burgeoning knights and a challenge for young men to overcome to prove their worth in the world. Many have compared him to the Green Man, a mythical figure who appears everywhere from Celtic to Nepali mythology. The Green Man embodies the natural wild world we have to contend with, or the power struggle of our innate animal law. For this reason, he's also often called an incarnation of the devil, the beastly side of humanity we have a responsibility to do battle with. Still, the Green Knight isn't really an evil figure, since he's later seen as one of King Arthur's bannermen in his aligned army of knights. The Lady of the Lake is a central character in the legend of King Arthur. She's either a humanoid creature from the fairy world or a human sorcerer who relies heavily on fairy magic. She first appeared in Old English epics in the 1100s, and her role is often murky. Fairies in Arthurian stories are female characters whose natures are ever-shifting. They can help or harm Arthur along his way. The Lady of the Lake is one such character who does both. On the beneficial side, she's the one who gifts Arthur with the legendary magical sword Excalibur, but in some versions of the British King's story, she also eliminates his mentor, the wizard Merlin. Although this element is questionable, as the crux of her imprisonment of Merlin in an eternal tomb may have been due to his aggressive lust for her, so who's at fault in that situation will be left up to scholars to decipher. She also has a special relationship with Arthur's sometime rival and sometimes friend, the knight Lancelot, and is known to have a key interest in helping him along his path of chivalry and virtue. In 2004, 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley was on a camping trip with his father and his local Boy Scout troop at Cuberant Lake in Utah. One morning, while he and his father were fishing, Garrett got his feet wet, so he decided to walk the couple hundred or so yards back to the camp to change his socks. His father watched him walk back onto the trail and turn, and tragically, that was the last time he ever saw his son. Nobody at the camp had seen Garrett approaching, despite the fact that from the turn at the lake, he would have been immediately visible to all the scouts there his entire walk back. Despite the efforts of the entire troop of 24 people, and later helicopters mounted with searchlights, Garrett was never found. And even to this day, his body has never been found, which is bizarre, as if he had been attacked by a wild animal, which is the most popular theory, there should have been at least something remaining of him on the trail, such as the bright red and white clothes he was wearing that day. The fishing pole that Garrett was using that day also seems to have disappeared with him. leaving authorities even more baffled in an already immensely confusing case. Trolls are creatures from Nordic folklore. They were described as humanoid creatures that lived in family units in caves and mountainous regions, and were actually very similar to human beings originally. There is some discrepancy, though, as troll was also an Old Norse noun that could be interpreted as fiend, demon, or werewolf, but the most popular version was the isolated mountain-dwelling version. The concept of the troll under or on a bridge not letting travelers pass later came about in the folktale Three Billy Goats Gruff, and trolls have lived on into the modern day, taking on an interesting new form in online discourse. Salamanders are real-life amphibians that live in riverbeds around the world, but they've also had a long tenure in mythology as elemental beasts associated with fire. Since the ancient Greeks, they've been used in magic rituals meant to conjure fire, especially in alchemy, due to the belief that they are fire-resistant beings. This has ended up not being the case, unfortunately, so please don't try throwing one in your fireplace. Will-o'-the-wisps are creatures from English folk legend. They take the form of a small light and will appear in bogs, swamps, and marshes at night to lead travelers astray. Depending on which interpretation you believe, they're either supernatural fairies or the lingering spirits of stillborn children, which is incredibly morbid. Scientists actually propose an explanation for this phenomena, saying that the combination of natural gases present in swamps and bogs can cause spontaneous combustion, which is responsible for the lights being seen there at night. Pukas are small white or black-furred creatures from Celtic mythology, very similar to goblinoids in most of their traits, except for one key difference, which is their ability to shapeshift. They tend to shapeshift into creatures that match their size, animals like goats, rabbits, hares, cats, and dogs. Like most shapeshifters from mythology, their true nature is a mystery to us, but they seem to err on the side of malevolence and dark-hearted intentions. The Highgate Cemetery may be the most popular haunted destination in all of England. A forested gravesite, it holds the final resting places of many historical figures, such as Karl Marx. Unsurprisingly, it's not uncommon for visitors who sneak in at night to claim that they see spirits of the famous dead roaming around there. So, NYU students, be alert. You still might have a chance at that Ouija board session with Karl Marx. Wow, a Ouija board session with Karl Marx has to be the most liberal arts degree activity that has ever been invented. In Eagle River, Wisconsin in 1961, Joe Simonton heard a loud piercing sound in the mid-morning and went outside to investigate. What he reportedly saw there was a large chrome-colored saucer levitating above the ground. From inside the saucer, 3 short men in business suits and strange helmets stepped outside and passed Joe an empty jug, which he assumed they wanted him to fill with water. Joe filled the jug with water and returned it to the men, which they used alongside a strange grill to prepare and cook several small pancakes. This is one of the most bizarre extra- or ultra-terrestrial sightings in history, but there is a long tradition of fairies and elves being attracted to sweets and sugars. Before the mass production of candy, naturally sweet foods were the most common offerings to fairies, with honey being offered in Devon, England, and blackberries being left on their branches instead of harvested for visiting fairies in the Isle of Man. Another story from Scotland details a baker being kidnapped and taken away to the fairy realm, specifically to bake cakes for its inhabitants. We can't exactly track where this correlation comes from, but it does make sense given fairies' relationship with children and their own childish nature. We've already kind of touched on missing 411 cases, and many people are already familiar with the concept, but for like the 5 of you who don't know what the term missing 411 means, it was coined to describe the disturbingly common trend of people going missing in parks and forests across America, and really the world at large, under mysterious and unexplained circumstances. It's relevant to fairies because the fairy world is most commonly said to be hidden somewhere in the deep woods, and because fairies are described as spotting people out and kidnapping them when they're hiking in the forest off trail. Also, in many 411 case compilations from the US, it's pointed out that the victims tend to be of German heritage, which is interesting given that most traditional fairy and elf mythologies describing fairy abductions do come from Germanic cultures. Though this is not really a verified part of the missing 411 phenomenon, and to be honest, the authenticity of the phenomenon itself is also highly debated, but it still makes for an interesting story nonetheless. Fairy circles are naturally occurring rings of mushroom growth that can be found in forests. Mushrooms grow in this circular arc pattern commonly due to chemical processes involving their roots. But in the medieval era of Europe, there were plenty of explanations given for fairy circles that didn't account for their scientific reality. In England and France, they were said to be areas where fairies and elves had danced together, while in Germany they were said to be locations where witches or the devil were conducting rituals. And in Austria specifically, it was said that the ground had been singed and burned by dragon fire, which meant that nothing but mushrooms could grow there for 7 years. This reminds me of the Devil's Tramping Ground in Bear Creek, North Carolina, a spot of woods where there's a perfect 40 by 40 foot dirt circle that hasn't seen natural plant growth in centuries, remaining barren. Scientists have been there and have been unable to explain why this specific spot can't grow grass despite being surrounded by it. And there are many legends about the place, including that it's a place for demonic rituals, or the devil itself. I've both talked about and visited the Devil's Tramping Ground in past videos and found strange things there, so I suggest checking that out if you want to know more. Anyways, the last thing to touch on here are crop circles, which are circular patterns said to be left in cornfields by visiting aliens. We'll talk about some more final analogies between aliens and fairies in the next entry, but both being said to be responsible for leaving circular patterns in nature when they visit is another interesting link. We've already talked at length about connections between fairies and aliens. They're the two most famous supernatural creatures that kidnap people and take them away to strange worlds, either within UFOs or within the fairy dimension. Both often tend to make their presence known through the manipulation or production of bright and powerful lights. Those who say they've encountered or been abducted by fairies or aliens often claim that they appear with a blinding light, and that the world or craft they take them into is similarly light and bright. They both often tend to leave victims alive after abducting them, and experiment on them or transform them in some way. They also both include the victim disappearing for what feels like a short while to them, then returning to the real world and discovering that they've been missing for hours or even days. UFO lore is currently being reshaped in America, with it now being hotly debated whether the unidentified crafts sighted by American military servicemen are extraterrestrial, as in from outer space like aliens, or ultra-terrestrial, as in from Earth or a separate dimension like fairies. The UFO disclosure is so public now that the vice president even commented, stating that he believes the crafts to be demons, which would probably make them ultra-terrestrial and closer to fairies rather than aliens. Although the average American seems to care more about their physical living conditions rather than UFO disclosure these days, it's still interesting to see the most powerful people in the country discussing this supernatural. In 1952, near the Blue Mountains of Oregon, 2-year-old Keith Parkins disappeared from his grandparents' ranch. A search and rescue team would find him 19 hours later, 12 miles away from where he vanished, across the mountain range, lying on a frozen pond without his jacket in completely torn clothing. Thankfully, he was still alive, but the miraculous trip should be impossible. It would take an experienced hiker around 20 hours to cover the distance Keith traveled through the Blue Mountains, and the terrain is rough, with ruins and barbed wire fences scattered throughout. On top of that, it was freezing cold winter at the time when Keith made his trip, so experts are extremely confused as to how this young boy was able to both travel that far and survive the journey. When he was asked by the search party what happened, he simply told them that he had been scratched by a cat. Fairy forts are the names given to remaining pre-medieval ruins of forts and other circular constructs in Ireland. Dating back as far as 500 BCE, it's still common for locals to ascribe these locations with folklore and believe that they contain some kind of fairy or druid magic. There is also the concept of fairy paths in Irish folklore, which are straight lines or highways between the fairy forts that fairy spirits and creatures can travel at immensely high speeds. It's actually common for townspeople to prevent construction companies and real estate developers from purchasing property around fairy forts or building projects across the invisible lines that they believe may actually be a fairy path, even to this day, as they don't want to interrupt the fairies' and elves' ability to traverse Ireland freely. Elf-shot is a term that was discovered in an Old English medical text called the Weopherstus, which is believed to have been written in the 10th century. It refers to spontaneous pain in any area of the body, as back then this was believed to have been caused by elves firing invisible arrows at people. There is another secondary use of the phrase elf-shot that was common back then, which was what people called the ancient arrowheads that they discovered in Europe. When medieval Europeans found the ancient stone arrowheads that their ancestors created in the wild, it was common for them to believe that they were actually the arrowheads of elf arrows, and had fallen out of the sky from where I guess the elves lived in some kind of celestial city. These arrowheads were also sometimes binded with silver after being found and used as amulets in defense against witchcraft, since people assumed they already held some kind of magic power within. Edward Woodstock was the son of King Edward III and the heir apparent to the throne of England before dying prior to his father's death, and thus abdicating the royal crown to his son Richard II. He was known as the Black Prince and was a fierce swordsman who was legendarily accomplished on battlefields across Europe. According to historians, there was a rumor among commoners and noblemen that he was a descendant of the devil, due to his stark red hair and brutal actions in war, and the larger theory at the time that his entire familial Plantagenet bloodline was connected to Melusine. According to English legend, Melusine is a fairy entity who emerged from the water, possibly being a mermaid or some kind of serpent, and at some point in history married into the Plantagenet family and bore children with them before vanishing. This is all interesting, as the devil in that Christian context would have likely been portrayed as a large red dragon cast down into the lake of fire, this being before John Milton's Paradise Lost was released, and the devil and Lucifer the fallen angel became synonymous. So here we actually have one of the earliest cases of a reptilian humanoid conspiracy, which would follow the British royal family throughout the rest of their history into the modern day. Ruling elites likening themselves to descendants of gods in ancient and medieval times wasn't uncommon, and even today many of the richest and most powerful people on Earth often joke about being aliens or reptilians. This kind of reputation helps to serve the interests of the rich and powerful, as it makes their fortunes and power seem earned or gotten through mystical means, rather than won or earned through conquest, business, or material success. Theodore Roosevelt was the 26th President of the United States. Throughout his life, he was an athlete and big game hunter and a wilderness explorer and a soldier who fought against the Spanish Army in Cuba. As president, he pursued ambitious policies of expansion when it came to industry, as well as America's military reach across foreign territories. But he was also a conservationist who signed many protections for national parks and forests into law. There's a duality to his personality, both a protector and an exploiter of the natural world, which has led to a loosely defined theory online that at some point in his youth exploring the wilderness, He went too deep into the woods and was taken into the fairy world, where he made a deal with otherworldly beings that both guaranteed his ascension to the presidency and forced him to ensure the protection of their territory. The shoe masks are artifacts first discovered in an archaeological dig site called Sangxingdui in Sichuan, China. These bronze masks were created in the ancient Shu kingdom, which was said to have been founded by an individual known as Sangsong, an ancient king with protruding and prominent eyes. Eye symbology is very prevalent in Shu artifacts, and some believe this is due to the legendary king. Although as far as the masks themselves go, there are many different interpretations. Some think they're meant to display Sansong and other kings, while some think they're meant to display spirits or gods, and others think that they're meant to display a ritual priest class among the Shu. The Shu were known to destroy their cultural creations regularly in sacrificial pits, so knowledge about them and why they disappeared is sparse. But what's most interesting for us today are the sharpened elvish ears present on the masks. These masks would have been created around 3,000 years ago, long before the genesis of elf and fairy mythologies, or any contact China would have had with, at the time, a nascent Europe. So this is likely the first appearance of these kinds of sharpened elf ears in human history, and we don't really know what they're meant to depict. Ordinary men of the time, or perhaps something supernatural. Elf ears wouldn't appear again until depictions of satyrs in Greco-Roman artwork, and eventually they'd be actually applied to elves and fairies in medieval European artwork. But unlike dragons, another symbol that appeared throughout cultures that had no contact with each other in ancient times, the elf ears are kind of hard to explain. For dragons, it's easy to understand that they were based on real-world reptiles and other natural predators. But for elf ears, where could they possibly have come from? And why did they appear in multiple cultures before they had contact with each other? And why were they also so commonly associated with the supernatural? It is possible they're meant to represent horns or something else, but we really can't be sure. Lastly, I wanted to touch on squares. It's interesting that squares and rectangles are so prevalent in things that human beings manufacture. It seems like they're almost the default, like floor patterns, TV screens, house shapes. Really everything that we make use squares, despite the fact that triangles are supposedly the most stable shape. We don't have an explanation for this, but fairies and elves are heavily tied to geometry, with them being said in some interpretations to originate from the fourth dimension, where they show their true tesseract-like forms and have the ability to see time forwards and backwards like we perceive length and width. So maybe there is some kind of connection with squares and rectangles there, but this is something I'm currently investigating. I think I'll be revealing more about that soon, though. To finish today, I have a recording that I'd like to share with you all. In 2021, my friend, without my knowledge, told comedian Alex Biran to prank phone call me on his live stream. Alex wasn't prepared at the time, but what he got may have been the most concrete proof we have of elvish existence to this day. It's since been deleted from his platforms. I'm not sure why. Perhaps he's scared of what was revealed, but I think you should listen. You'll get more than you ever could have imagined.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, this is Jarmish calling from Market Mall. How you doing? We're just starting casting for our Christmas elves to assist with Santa Claus, and just going through some of your stats here. Got in touch with some headhunters from LinkedIn, and seems like you might be pretty good. You're a little under our height restriction, but we could probably lift you up with some boots. You know, get you all set up to be one of Santa's little helpers.
A little under.
Yeah. We just because we have 5'5" is the lowest height for the elves. But you're like 5'4", right? So we could probably bring you up an inch to be tall enough to be an elf.
Where'd you get my stats? I'm 5'5" these days.
You're 5'5" these days?
Yeah, I made a mistake on my driver's license when I was 18, and I put 5'3", but I'm actually 5'5".
Perfect. That's great. Well then, no boots necessary. You can be. Yes, shame on me. Sorry about that. I thought you were 5'4". You're actually 5'5". Great.
I make the cut.
Perfect. Yeah. Great. Okay. Do you have any skills? Like, can you dance or knit or do voices or anything like that?
Not really.
You're not a big skill guy?
No, I really don't have any skills.
Little skill guy. Okay, cool. Let me hear your best elf voice.
Well, let me hear yours so I know like what to base it off.
I can't actually do that. I'm 6'1", so the tallest height for an elf is 5'7". We're looking for people between 5'5" and 5'7".
It's quite a small window.
You know what? I gotta be honest. Your natural speaking voice is perfect.
Oh, okay, awesome.
It's elf-like. Yeah.
Thank you.
Not the ones from Lord of the Rings. I'm talking naughty or nice winter North Pole elves. You're hired.
All right.
Yeah.
Send it over.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just need to know your sorry, need to know your. Oh yeah. Have you had a background check just because you're going to be working with kids?
Yeah.
You've had a background check? What would be your...
I thought in the North Pole, I thought that everybody was like ageless.
Well, the North Pole isn't real. This is just, it's a fun thing for kids.
This is a casting for like actual, like a mall Santa thing?
Yeah, did you think you were getting cast for the North Pole?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought this was like a call from the North Pole.
Oh, okay. No. This is just this is like a mall elf. Yeah.
Oh. I'm not really interested then. I'm sorry.
Oh, fair enough. I'm strict, but I'm fair. At the North Pole, the height requirement is actually 5'6", so you'd be too short to work as a legitimate elf.
So are they like actual Lord of the Rings elves?
No. Those are taller still. Yeah, those are like Legolas,
okay.
like Orlando Bloom. Yeah, we have Charlie. We have what is it? Not Charlie's Chocolate. Well, I guess he inherited it. Yeah, it is Charlie. You get what I'm saying. Oompa Loompa? You want to be an Oompa Loompa?
They're a bit shorter than that even, aren't they?
I'm sure if you just kind of slump, you'll still be fine.
Aren't they like 3 foot?
3 foot, 5'4". I mean, at a certain point, what's the difference, right?
I mean, at that point, even you could be an elf, right?
No, I'm a Lord of the Rings elf. I'm a bow and arrow, fucking immortal, hot elf.
Yeah, but like the difference between 3 foot and 5 foot is less than the difference between 6'1" and 5'5". Is it just your voice that
okay,
you couldn't be an elf?
Sure, I'll be an elf. If it makes you feel better, I'll be an elf.
Well, I mean, you called to cast me, but it looks like you figured it out on your own.
You know what? Sometimes the simplest solution is the best.
Well, good luck with it. It sounds like a lot of fun.
You too.